get that support straight away and then understand that that failure may in fact be what is going to contribute to the greatest success of something else. Perhaps it's here for a reason, I don't know.
I'm Dani Valent, and this is Dirty Linen, the podcast that takes the issues the hospitality industry finds hard to air in public and shakes them all about. For 11 years, Kate Bartholomew has been an owner of some of Melbourne's most exciting, fun and progressive restaurants. She owns Coda and Tonka in the city. She's a dynamic person around town, and she's here because she reached out to me on Instagram before I'd even started this podcast to mention that she had a lot of stuff to say about mental health and hospitality. Kate, I think you agree with me that these are important conversations to be having.
Yes, I can't think of anything more important really to talk about. You know, we're all talking about health and safety with this horrible virus, but what about our mental health and the impact it's having on everybody, I'm sure. So yes, thank you so much for thinking of me in this space and for everything you're doing for our industry.
Yeah, we're all in it together as we keep hearing. But yeah, there are all kinds of different ways that we can support one another through what we're going through. Of course, it's a global pandemic, but it does impact on people in such different ways. And last week we spoke to Annie Smithers, and it was such an amazing privilege to have her on the show. She's such a fantastic person. But you said that chat meant something particular to you, Kate.
Yeah, I mean, I think listening to Annie talk, I mean, Annie is an industry legend. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But to hear part of her backstory, it was such a privilege to listen to that podcast. And some things really resonated with me. You know, when she said, I was completely and utterly fucked. And I was just like, oh my God, yes. That line just stood out for me, and I felt that. And, you know, why is it that we get to this, you know, ground zero, this horrible point before we can actually say, you know, she talks about grabbing her doctor walking past saying, I'm desperate, I need help. Why is it that so many of us get to rock bottom before we can be honest and say, oh my God, I'm in the shit, I need some help? And I also love that she went on to say, you know, I called the tax department and say, I can't pay this bill. You know, it's just the situation. I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. The podcast was amazing.
Well, so I didn't mean it. It's not. This isn't the podcast where we say how great the podcast is, but thanks. But
sorry.
Did you have a key experience going to her restaurant as well?
Yeah, I did. I went to her amazing restaurant. A couple of my girlfriends, Sunday and Sarah, had organised a group of sort of 10 of us to go to Trentham. We got this amazing house, and it was just this beautiful experience. And I'd had a baby. My mind isn't very good at organising the chronology of when I started to get sick, but I think it was about Henry, my little boy, who's now 3.5, and he's gorgeous. I think he was about 1 at this time, and I was so unwell. And I remember they took me that night to the restaurant in Trentham, and it was the first time I could see colour and feel warmth in my body. And it was just the most beautiful dining experience. And when I was listening to the podcast, I went, oh my God, the first time I felt signs of life after having been so sick was sitting at Annie's restaurant, which I thought was, you know, a really nice, a nice thing when I was listening yesterday.
Yeah. Wow, but it sounds like you were not in a good place. So what does being sick mean for you?
Well, you know, I think a lot went into it. But, you know, when I look back, and I've worked with many psychologists over the years, and that just occurs because, you know, you move overseas or I grew up in Geelong. So, you know, when I was a kid and I was a very anxious child, exceptionally anxious, and my dad left when I was about 12 or 13, and my mum is the most amazing mum on earth, and she gave us the most perfect, amazing childhood, which I'm so proud of. But when I think about the particular times of when I began to get sick, it was around when Dad left, and I developed this thing called obsessive compulsive disorder, and it was my way of trying or feeling in control of a situation, and, you know, a whole lot of behaviours ensued, sort of like tapping. For me, it was tapping 4 times. Like I was constantly, it's really hard to imagine if you haven't had it. But there's this constant feeling of balance. So if I touch my leg on one side, I have to touch it 4 times and then repeat it on the other leg. It's like this wild thing. And if you don't do the compulsion, if you can't do it, then something catastrophic is going to happen to your family, for example. You know, so you really feel this guilt. If I don't do this behaviour, then something terrible is going to happen. It's just this crazy disorder that just kind of took over.
Did that seep into much of your life? Like you found like was that a dominating force in your life?
Oh, huge. And, you know, that was from when I was, let's say, 13. And I think I was able to start breaking it with the help of Michael, my now husband, you know, and I was so embarrassed about it. You know, I used to walk past like at nighttime and have to turn all the lights on in the house on and off 4 times. And it was really hard for my family to understand it. And, of course, I didn't want to talk about it because I was too embarrassed. So, you know, it was a really strange experience. But when you start engaging in those behaviours, they tend to get more and more and more and build and build and build. And it got to the point where I stopped driving. It just wasn't safe for me to drive because I had to do this behaviour. You know, so if I turn my indicator on, I have to turn it on 4 times, and then, do you know what I mean? And it's just a completely paralysing force. So I didn't start to get control of it probably till I met my husband when I was 23, and he was amazing with it. He was just completely, you know, he kind of made it all a bit of a joke and made it really lighthearted. And he brought that forward in me to the point, you know, he's like, I just felt that vulnerability in me was completely understood, and then I could kind of work through it, I suppose.
But had you know, when you're in that position and that there's this force that's dominating your life, were you able to just move ahead in other ways? Like, had you finished school? Had you embarked on a career? Like, were other things happening at the same time?
Yeah, they did. And I think in some ways, like, I learnt to channel it quite well. For example, like, this is an extreme, but in year 12, if I wrote 4 essays on this book, I'd have to write 4 essays on that book.
Oh, my goodness.
So that, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and then there'd be sort of these frantic, crazy writings, and Mum would be dropping these essays into my teachers around Geelong, and, you know, so there were times when I could channel that compulsion in a really good way, and I ended up being completely shocked by how I did at school. And I got into do arts at Melbourne Uni and did honours at Melbourne, and that was just an amazing experience for me. And the whole time I'd been working in restaurants, and I think there's something, you know, when I was a kid, I started working in restaurants when I was 14, and the kind of 2 choices you make were, I always knew I wanted to work, have money, that was always important to me, but there was kind of the retail option, or there was the restaurant option. But I felt like it was really good for my busy brain to be busy, which is what a restaurant gives you. You know, you never stop. So that noise and the constant mental interruption of customers really worked for me. And work has been the backbone, really, of stabilising my mental health, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I like a busy environment to distract me from those thoughts and those compulsions. That works for me.
Well, it's so interesting because I could imagine that although it could help and offer that stabilising force and that, you know, something fit to occupy your brain, that it could also amplify those things that you're prone to in some ways. Was that a danger that you could feel?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, from a practical sense, you know, if I'm about to carry 3 big heavy hot plates into the restaurant, I can't complete my compulsions, which usually are hand-based, so it might be tapping or rebalancing or whatever it might be, but I couldn't do that. So what I have to do was trick myself at the pass. So I'd be standing there and I was like, if you do this compulsion, you are going to, in fact, cause some sort of catastrophic event to your family. So I'd kind of trick the OCD. So I'd say, right, you're not allowed to do that anymore because we've got to get to this table. So it was just this kind of crazy, exhausting mind game.
I mean, it does sound exhausting. And the stakes are so high, like that you had to put, these catastrophes in front of your mind all the time. It's very upsetting. It's like you took a lot of responsibility on with these thoughts.
Yes, I think that's a really when I was thinking about it last night, I think that's a really good way of putting it. I kind of assumed some kind of responsibility for my family. And, I'm going to say this now and I'll regret it or whatever, but when I was a kid, I used to wake up, of course I'm so stressed, I'm thinking all the time, and I used to sit outside my family's bedrooms and listening to them breathe because, I needed to make sure that everyone was breathing and everything was okay. And for somehow I kind of assumed this role of caretaker of my family. Of course, my mum was doing an exceptional job and there was never any danger, but my young brain was just completely fried. And my obsessive compulsive came into that, like constantly checking their safety at night.
Wow.
And then repeating, going through the rooms 4 times over. And, I've got this amazing psychologist now. I've met my right match, and her name's Philippa. She works just on Collins Street, and she just, I often talk about that little girl and just that I want to hug her and tell her I'm sorry and tell her, it's going to make me cry, tell her, I wish I could take that all away from you.
Yeah.
And she's like, but you're her. You made it through. And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I'm looking at that girl. You can tell her right now, you're her, you're you. So, it's hard to go back and think about the level of stress that I was under. But it's kind of amazing to be here now and then to talk about it.
Wow. You're making me cry too. It's just, it's like you want to separate yourself from her and look after her and apologise to her or look after her.
I know. I want to protect her.
Yeah. But at the same time, you are the victory, like you are her success as well. So
yeah.
It was a very, I guess, draining and circuitous path that she took, but
yes, I know.
It is okay, right? Like,
yeah, it's so good.
For some reason, your mind had to go down those pathways.
Yeah, and I think
to search for peace.
And once I got to Michael, once I found my Michael, and he brings to me this joy and laughter, which I'd never kind of like. What he likes about me most is what I would consider most vulnerable and something I'd need to cover up. But he loves me even more because of that. And to have felt that, be completely authentic with him, was just a complete escape from what my mind had been doing for all of these years and this hiding this OCD behaviour. And once he celebrated and got it out in the open, I didn't need to do the behaviours nearly as much. So, once I was sort of into my 20s, I was feeling much better. And, although I decided driving was no longer safe for me, I still don't drive because there's been too much sort of recent stress. Anyway, I don't drive. But unfortunately, so things were going really well in my sort of 20s. I'm 37 now, I think. I think I'm 37. And then things really got ugly when we bought our third restaurant, Oter.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And, and that made it almost to the day of 2 years. And there were a whole lot of reasons Oter didn't work. So many reasons. And a lot of them was because I just had a baby, my beautiful Henry, and I'd become incredibly unwell with post-natal depression. But with Oter, many of the reasons that didn't work, I mean, Michael was trying to look after me and a baby. The other 2 restaurants, there was a terrible suicide that occurred within that Oter family that crippled. It certainly wasn't that, but there were just so many pieces about it. And then when a restaurant fails, the anxiety and the just humiliation around it was so difficult. And I think I've been thinking a lot about people at the moment, as restaurants are failing, I just recall so deeply those feelings of just shame, just so embarrassed. And then you throw in the financial layer and it decimated us, just decimated. And, once, we'd been through the recession with Coda and we'd made a bit of money and we were feeling comfortable, and then we just blew the lot. And then I'd had a baby, my beautiful Henry, and am I talking too fast?
No, but there is have a sip of water and take a breath. I mean, I guess it's so much, Kate, and such a crush of major events in your life that it's. I mean, there's so many directions that I want to go, but I think I want to ask you, why do you feel shame about it? Why was there that shame that was so crippling?
Great question. I've got here, I've wrote out some notes to try and organise my brain. And there's this most amazing, she's a social worker called Brené Brown. Have you heard of her?
I have, yes. And I have watched that TED Talk. Yeah.
And the one I'm talking about is vulnerability. This goes for 20 minutes, and if anyone out there listening, if you could do it, it's just such an important thing for me. But she talks about connection and the feeling of disconnection and shame, and just how absolutely essential it is that we are vulnerable and that we show our vulnerability to other people. And I suppose that was a big part of me wanting to do this today, was going, oh my God, I can't believe I'm talking about this stuff out loud, but we need to yell it from the top of the buildings for each other, and we need to understand that our vulnerability is such, I wrote down a word, so endearing, it's so human. And I think, immediately when I've had so many people with mental health issues in our restaurants come to me and say, whenever I sit down with them, I just want to hug them and never let them go. That connection couldn't be closer. When someone tells you, I'm not doing so well, you immediately feel absolutely privileged and connected for that conversation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, because, apart from the fact that they're, I guess, trusting you, it also would probably let a few pennies drop where you can then look back on behaviours that perhaps might have presented as frustrating or tricky to work around. Then you can, once things are in their proper context and it's because it's a person that's having some feelings and some difficulties, then I guess your compassion comes to the fore as well, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's the huge part of it. And I think we all need to talk so much more about this, about mental health. It's just frightening what's happening out there with particularly male suicide. It's just out of control, and we've got so much to do. So, yeah.
So let's talk about postnatal depression and about being a mother and a restaurateur. Was the postnatal depression something that sort of crept up on you, or did it swallow you like a wave? What was it like?
Yeah, sure. I think of my experiences in mental health, the postnatal depression was the depths of the worst thing that I've been through. And when, Michael really didn't want to have kids and sort of talked him into it, and we had our beautiful Henry, but during the pregnancy, he was really anxious and worried about the whole thing. And he said to me, everything's going to change. And I said, nothing is going to change. I said, he'll fit into our lives. I was completely delusional. And nothing's going to change. He's going to be a restaurant baby, all these sorts of things. And he is, and he's so beautiful. But when I had Henry at about 19 weeks, I had to have an emergency stitch.
Yeah.
And which meant that I was on bed. I was bedridden.
Wow. For
the balance of the pregnancy. And that just came in and completely upturned everything I'd promised him about this experience.
Of course.
I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even walk it was just a complete disaster. And then I got you have to take a lot of progesterone when you do something like that. And then I got this crazy tumour. And so I had to have all these operations, and I was completely, I don't know what the word is. It was just so full on. And then beautiful little Henry came, and my God, I just loved him. But the postnatal depression was so frightening because it's really hard to talk about that relationship because it was never about Henry and it was never about Michael or my family. It was just how I felt. And, I recall those hours sort of in that year leading up to going to Annie Smithers' restaurant, the darkness. I remember looking out and there was no colour in the trees. There was no smell in the air. And every single minute I dreaded. I couldn't handle thinking about the coming night or the coming morning, and the sleep deprivation was catastrophic. And the whole thing just sort of fell apart, and I would just spend my days begging Michael to please leave me. I said, just take everything, take my wallet, just walk away. I beg you to leave me. You cannot stay with me. I was just so sick. And he and my mum kind of nursed me back to health while looking after this beautiful little baby and with a failed restaurant. And, oh, my God, it was just shit.
That is so devastating to hear about. And it must have been, I'm sure it's one of those things where you've got this beautiful boy at the same time. And as you said, you loved him so much. It must have been so hard to not be who and how you wanted to be through that. It must have been another layer of difficulty through that.
Yeah, absolutely. Since then as well, I found it really hard to find my place back at work as well. I went back, I did my first Sunday double when Henry was 3 weeks old.
Whoa.
Because I was desperate. I was desperate to get back to work. I needed it. I needed something to quieten my brain, something to help me, something to, and it was just a disaster of a day. The tills went down at 2 p.m. and everyone wanted to pay their bills and I was just sobbing on the bar.
Oh, my goodness.
It was just a disaster. But every day now you sort of creep back into a, healthier, I feel better about myself, all those sorts of things. But it's been a full-on recovery with a whole lot of hands on deck. So I'm so grateful.
Were you having treatment through that period?
Yeah, so I went to my GP and I had a long history with psychologists. Went to my GP and she's not like, you don't have postnatal depression, you've just got flat-out depression. And I was like, oh, whatever. So she put me on a drug called Cymbalta, and that made a big difference, I think. I was sort of able to kind of get out of bed a bit, and that made a big difference. In fact, I wish I'd been treated on medication. Just looking at my own personal example, no comment on anybody else, but I wish I'd had some kind of treatment when I was younger to quieten that really intense brain. I just could have lived a different experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's so hard to know, isn't it? I mean, I'm no doctor, but I guess the effect that the medication has at a certain time in your life, you may not be able to map that back, and it would have done this then. I don't know. I don't know how you look back at things, but yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. So, and that was good. And then I found Philippa, and then massive efforts from my mum and Michael and our whole work team and my gorgeous friends and my sister, and then I sort of crawled out of this cave and I'm feeling actually amazing today. I feel amazing despite the world's kind of on fire. I feel really lucky and grateful and happy.
And is that a day-by-day proposition, Kate, or is it something you have to, keep an eye on, or do you feel like you're operating generally from a position of, greater strength and security and, I guess, certainty?
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I certainly feel like I'm operating well 9 days out of 10. Which is amazing.
It is incredible. Are there things that you need to make sure that you do so that you do get that 9 days out of 10?
That's a good question. I think for me it's know my limits and say, do you know what, I need a break, or so it's just putting up my hand and saying, you know what, I need to sleep in, or just being a bit more selfish is the wrong word, but just understanding my needs and asking for them is something I need to do.
Yeah. I did that last night. I gave out soup on Thursday morning. The reason I'm saying it is I just did a lot of giving, and I felt really, and it was beautiful and it's enriching as well. And, I love doing it. But by the end of the day, I was feeling a bit depleted. And I just asked my husband, I just actually tried to think of something I wanted so I could ask someone to do something for me. And I just got him to get me a hot water bottle. And I didn't want a hot water bottle that much, but I just really wanted someone to do something for me. And that's what I could think of.
Oh my God, you would get a serious tick from my psychologist for that. She'd be like, excellent.
Really? Okay. Yeah, that's just what I wanted. So yeah, I think it's important. Maybe that's a thing, like, to ask for something, like, is that it? It's just that to let yourself be someone that needs things from other people.
Yeah, totally. God, we've got to rework all of our systems. When I had a baby, and people use that term, it takes a village. Oh my God. And then you look around the world at the moment, and there's elderly people dying in these homes of this pandemic. People can't get in, can't see them. And, Mum was telling me last night the figure is like 75% of people in aged care facilities have not had a single visitor in the last year. And I just said, what? That was just so devastating. Why on earth don't we should be living in villages, when you go to India and when you go to Vietnam, the kids are out on the street till 11 p.m, or their cousins there, their grandparents live with them. That would just be such a better system, in my opinion, to have a proper village of people helping and, keeping our young and our elderly together and supported. And I don't know, I've been thinking about that a lot today.
Yeah, I think it's we'd probably deal with, the end of life much better if we were surrounded by more old people. And I think, to value that wisdom, and even to, I guess, to honour the decline. I think it's that's a big question, isn't it? And there's that show, old people for 4-year-olds, or whatever that show is, where they send kindergarten kids into old people's homes, and you just think, it's great. Like, there's connections, and you'd be surprised. There's so much connection to be had between people of all different types and at all different ages, and segregating people by age, actually, if you think about it, it seems pretty odd. It's a pretty odd thing to do.
Oh, it's completely insane. And so there's people that are elderly have got the time to jiggle a baby on their knee for an hour, or settle a colicky baby, where the mum and the dad are tired because they've just gone through this experience. But, it's just like, what are we doing? You just want to scream and say, why aren't we yelling about suicide rates? Why aren't we changing all the dynamics of the way we're doing it, everything? I know that's probably getting a bit big and utopian, but there's a lot, isn't there?
There is a lot. And I guess, one thing about the pandemic is that it does feel like an opportunity to rethink lots of things. It's that real push and pull between, here's the opportunity, but there's this massive back to normal push as well. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast, actually, is because I was scared that things would just go, quote unquote, back to normal. There is such a desire in us for this to be over. So, and the only normality we know is the normality we had. So it's really hard to find the energy to build something fresh. But I think it would be a shame not to use this as an opportunity to do so. But so why don't we talk about that? You're an expert in hospitality and running restaurants. So why don't we talk about some of the things that you would like to see for our, how we come out of this and how hospitality could be different and better?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing we've got to do is protect our visa workers. You've been the champion of that. We to understand what visa work is to a restaurant is to understand what great food is. All of that input that they bring in, they are the backbone. No one can go out and have great food without visa workers. That's just how it is. And so, number one, we've got to make sure that people are being looked after, and they're not. So thank you for everything you're doing. Number two, we need to get in there, and every restaurateur has to go through their restaurant and figure out how to make it more eco-friendly. The wastage is out of control. We're filling the earth. We've got homeless people on the street. I'll walk past 20 people on the street today to get to work, and they've got no food. We've got to absolutely upend our wastage and properly contribute in a more, what's the word I'm looking for, thoughtful way. I think everyone's got to do that straight away. Changes.
What about from a mental health perspective in the industry, Kate?
Yeah, sure. Something I really dislike about the industry is this competitiveness and this, like the idea that if a restaurant's quiet, we're not going to go in there. In fact, they need you all the more. I can tell you firsthand what it's like when people look at a menu and keep walking because there's no one in the restaurant. It is devastating, and you're just begging, wishing, hoping, and I've had the opposite end where it's been too busy and we couldn't look after everybody. But imagine if restaurateurs could say, we're having a difficult year. Can you come in? Like, imagine if that was considered a strength to say that.
Wow.
A big institution restaurant that's been there for 10 years. Imagine if they could say on Instagram, whatever forum, hey guys, this has been a tough year. We'll flock there, but why do we consider that as a weakness? That's something that I think about. Mental health, that whole old chef yelling, long hours in the kitchen in the heat. Adam's amazing at that, and he always gives our kitchen hands a go in larder if they want to. So I'm really, really proud of all that he does there. And he's not a yeller of a chef, which is amazing. But I think, we all need to create better systems around mental health and how we can properly protect the people that we work with.
Because do you think that you talked about hospitality in some ways as being a really good place for you to land because of the way it allowed you to manage your own mental health? But do you think that the industry does draw in people who is a bit like you, or do you think that those hot conditions, those long hours, the pressure, do you think that creates an environment that's rife for mental health concerns?
Yeah, well, I think, the industry is known, like Alla Wolf Tusker was saying, it's more transient. We're not necessarily making career people out of this. A lot of them have got uni degrees. So I think it naturally brings people in that rethinking the way or not quite sure where they're going. So they might pick up a job for a year or two in the industry. And, if I look back on my own past, there's plenty of times where I've been like, I just need a break from uni and I'm just going to stop and think about it for a bit. And then, of course, there's a part where the alcohol kicks in. And, alcohol and drugs are rife in restaurants. And, you get to the end of a long shift and you really want to drink and you have more. And so I think it definitely picks up a whole lot of people that, drink during service, taste wine during service. So I think there's people naturally that feel some sort of almost security in that numbing ability that you can drink at work and it's part of your job. Does that kind of make sense? I don't know if I've answered that very well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, are there particular things that you try to do as an employer to make sure that you're giving your employees the best chance at stability and mental health?
Yeah, well, I mean, Michael and I, the kind of people that we are, it sounds hard to understand, but it's really quite honest. We've never really been interested in money. The way we've run the businesses has always been much more about sort of a lifestyle. So, Michael, any other day of the week, will be taking someone out, checking on their mental health. Off they'll go to Cumulus and have, something to eat, something to drink, and he's always engaged with people, perhaps too much, perhaps we get a bit too casual in that area. But I think just the constant checking in. And Michael is excellent at, everybody knows how he feels. So if he's not feeling very good, you'll know about it. So I think he really brings that out in other people. Like, if you're not feeling good, tell me and we'll go out and we'll go see a movie or we'll do something. So I think, it's not been the best way to do business, certainly not financially, but we definitely have this kind of protective, motherly, always checking in.
Sounds good. It sounds very nurturing.
It's not good for the P&L, but I think people enjoy that style.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've recovered from what you've been through in terms of, that crush of devastation of the postnatal depression and losing Oter, the restaurant closing?
Yes, good questions. I think I've recovered from the humiliation and the shame. In fact, now I consider Oter was kind of a gift, teaching us to run our businesses better with less complacency, and my God, are we stronger. And I'm very happy to say to people, hey, I had a restaurant that failed, and I feel confident in that, and I feel like I'm not being judged about that. Financially, no. It's going to take us at least another 5+ years to try and recover. And the postnatal depression, I feel like I'm 70% there, or maybe 80, probably 70, I think. Yeah.
That's really good. So what about if someone was in a position now where they just weren't sure if if their restaurant was going to make it out the other end of this? What would you say to them? What kind of advice could we offer?
Oh, great question. I mean, I'd like people to be able to say it or call it, or because it's sort of like spreading the word, but I understand that's kind of more devastating, than rumour talks. You hear these guys aren't doing so well. So that's not good advice. What's the best advice?
I mean, would it be something? I mean, I love how you said you've come out of it stronger. Like, is it? I mean, is it to not equate a business's failure with personal failure? Is there something in there that you could find?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I don't want to name restaurateurs, but some of the very best restaurateurs have had restaurants go under. In fact, many, and that really got me through those hard times with Oter. I was like, but he did it, and he's lost this and lost that, and he's fine, and he's the coolest chef in Australia. You know what I mean? So I think that's true, and you will be stronger, and you are stronger. And I think anyone that's not feeling so good right now, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't, is just, can you somehow pick up that phone or tell someone? Like, I wish that I'd been clearer and earlier to get to my GP and get a bit of help. I wish I'd recognised the signs a bit earlier. I'm not doing so well. So, yeah, I think my advice would be get that support straight away, and then understand that failure may in fact be what is going to contribute to the greater success of something else. Perhaps it's here for a reason. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's great. It's very heartening, and it's very human, which I would have to say about this chat overall. Kate, I think you're amazing. I think I'm so impressed with you for sharing what you've gone through, and for, coming out the other side of it. And I mean, just then the restaurants that you've created through this and out of this, and you and Michael, like, you've just brought such great things to Melbourne, and it just sounds like being one of your employees would be just like a really nice place to be. So good on you. Thank you for sharing. I hope it hasn't been too wearing for you to speak so openly.
No, I'm feeling I was nervous about this, but I'm actually feeling pretty good now, and I'm proud. I feel good to get it out there.
That's great. I reckon you should be really proud. I just want to say to anybody who's listening that if you need someone to talk to right now, as Kate said, do reach out to your GP. If you need to get on the phone to someone immediately, Lifeline Australia is 131114. There's also Beyond Blue, beyondblue.org.au. And also check out Hospo for Life, which Liam Crawley talked about last week, specific help for people in hospitality. Kate, thanks again for speaking to Dirty Linen, and thank you for being part of our mental health fortnight. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dani. It's been great. Thank you very much.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.